Trade talks revolving around the New York Rangers are continuing to escalate as one insider has linked the Rangers to multiple star players in the league, and one of them will shock Rangers fans. We're going to break it all down in this episode of Rangers Digest, but before we do, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. About 70% of you who watch these videos are not actually subscribed to the channel, so if you want to do yourself a favor, it's free. Hit that subscribe button and you get to stay up to date with everything New York Rangers. And let's dive right into it. Let's waste no time. The Rangers, obviously, we know that Chris Drury has stated that he's not done making moves. There are more moves coming, but after moving out Jacob Trouba last week, he wanted things to settle down a little bit. And I think, picking up a win against the Buffalo Sabres helps, things like that. But again, it is against the Buffalo Sabres, so the Rangers have a lot of work to do yet. And I think that Chris Drury wants to make another big splash in a big way. And this is very interesting, okay? From Overdrive, the Rangers GM Chris Drury has been in talks with the Canucks about JT Miller. And that was from Darren Dreger. He shares the details on Overdrive of the Rangers' search to be in the sweepstakes for JT Miller by trade. JT Miller, of course, was on leave until last night, where he did return to the Vancouver Canucks lineup, and they won 3-0. So very interesting stuff here around the league, because obviously it seems like JT Miller may be available for trade, and the New York Rangers are kicking tires on it. Again, this is a little bit old. This was about a week ago, but the initial report at least, but there are still talks going on about JT Miller specifically around the league. And this is from Phil Kosher. Don't envision this actually happening, but JT Miller is exactly the type of player this roster needs, both on and off the ice. He is very underrated defensively. When he locks in, he is a really good player. I mean, 103 points, I believe, last season with the Vancouver Canucks went off. So he would be a great acquisition for this team, but it would be a very interesting trade. And speaking of Millers, I wonder if the Vancouver Canucks, because they're having some defense problems and some defense injuries, would be interested in another Miller, in Keandre Miller, in a trade like this, because I think the Rangers want to ship out. I'm not saying that they want to ship out Keandre Miller, but I think that they're going to ship out either Keandre Miller or Ryan Lindgren, because one of those guys probably has to go. Lindgren wouldn't make sense to re-sign at this point. I think everyone thinks or knows that he might be on his way out of New York at this point, and credit where credit is due for Chris Drury. He signed that contract knowing if things went south, it was a very flexible deal that he could move out if need be. So credit where credit's due. He did do that, and Keandre Miller there's reports that he wants a significant increase, of course, in salary, and I just don't see that happening in New York. So there's a real possibility. I don't know if Vancouver would be interested in that, but just something to consider. And in terms of JT Miller, of course, just took that leave. He's back in action now. He is a point-a-game player once again for the Vancouver Canucks, obviously having that crazy year last year. Plays in a lot of situations, plays a lot of ice time. I mean, not a lot, but 18 minutes an average. That's pretty good, especially for a guy who plays power play 5-on-5, right? So I would say that's a healthy amount. He is getting older, so I would be a little reluctant to go after a guy already in his 30s. He could help the New York Rangers right now, but thinking of the future, you have aging guys right now like Zibanejad, like Artemi Panarin. Even though Panarin has been really good, you have to think about some of these things going forward at this point in time. So do you want another aging forward? I'm not sure, but this guy coming up does intrigue me, and there's been multiple reports about Dylan Cozens from the Buffalo Sabres, and we'll get into another target from the Buffalo Sabres as well that I touched on yesterday. There's been a lot of teams sniffing around Dylan Cozens. I would be terrified if I was the Sabres about making that deal, and that was from Elliot Friedman, and he explores the potential moves after, obviously, another loss for the Buffalo Sabres. They've now lost 8 in a row to this point, at the point of this recording. And that's very interesting. And from Phil Kosher, again, this is from Elliot Friedman. I heard that Anaheim wanted to move Fowler in the Jacob Trouba deal. Now, this, I think, all plays into everything, right? I think the Rangers didn't want to take back salary or a guy like Fowler because they have bigger plans in mind, right? And they wanted to, the Anaheim Ducks wanted Fowler back in the other way, which probably would have maybe helped the New York Rangers, but I think Drury has bigger plans, honestly. And at the end of the day, they could not get it done. I thought that was interesting. And again, it plays into this. Buffalo Sabres fans right now are all over Cozens. I do think teams have asked about him this year. If I'm Adams and the Sabres, I'm worried. If we trade him, does he become the next guy to succeed outside of Buffalo? And he has been, there's a lot of reporters or a lot of reports and insiders kind of loosely linking him to the New York Rangers. And I think it's very interesting. If you look at Dylan Cozens, I mean, he's only 23. He was only drafted a couple years ago. He's another big body, like 6'3". He's not huge or anything, but a big body, almost 200 pounds. You can throw his weight around a little bit. He's a great player. He just hasn't found it in Buffalo, but he is a great player, and he's in year 2 of a 7-year contract. Now, if you look at the contract, I am a little reluctant again, like I said with JT Miller. This is a much younger player, right? But I am a little reluctant because to make this trade if I was Chris Drury, because he makes $7.1 million for the next 5 years, depending on the time of the trade. I mean, essentially 4 years left on this deal if they get him around the trade deadline, let's say. But again, $7.1 million for a guy who is in year 2 of a 7-year deal. And he hasn't really become the player that, I guess the Buffalo Sabres were kind of promised when they drafted him in the draft just a couple of years ago, a top 10 pick. So I would be a little, I would look at that a little bit because he's still having a decent year in Buffalo. I mean, the Buffalo Sabres are a terrible team. They can't really develop any players. I wonder if that kind of plays into it as well. They haven't been able to develop too many players that aren't, Jack Eichel, who came into the league ready anyway. So, that could play a little bit into it as well. But I think he's a very interesting option. If you look at his stats this season for the Buffalo Sabres, 13 points in 29 games. So I do wonder, if this is a guy, and he's averaging almost 18 minutes of ice time, so he plays quite a bit. Like, he could fit into the Rangers, I think. Their lineup, we'll get to that in a second, and who might be going the other way to Buffalo. But again, decent year, but I would look at that. He hasn't really become this player, and he's already, going to be 24 years old that everyone thought he was going to be. So is it that he's playing in Buffalo, or, what exactly is it? I would look into that if I was the New York Rangers, but I think it's very intriguing. I think he could help the New York Rangers, but there's another guy in Buffalo too, in Alex Tuch, and we can look at their lineup, and I'll get back to his stats in just a second. Alex Tuch, I think, would be a very good option as well. I touched on him in a video yesterday. 2 years left, so I think it's a more tradable contract. He's a little bit older. He's a real player. I like Alex Tuch. He's a bigger body. He's not afraid to use his physicality either. So, and he makes far less. So I wonder if you look at a guy like that instead of Dylan Cozens, but I think Dylan Cozens has a lot more upside. I think with a change of scenery and a team, again, I would really look into it because the Rangers, I think we all know, are one of those teams in the National Hockey League that have a tough time developing players. It's true, right? Young players. So if he hasn't done that in Buffalo, to come over to the Rangers, I don't know if that's going to work. But I do think that there's a lot of upside there. So something to look at. I'm a bigger fan of Alex Tuch, I think, personally. But if you look at Dylan Cozens' seasons the last couple of years, last year, about a half a point a game player, roughly, right? So 47 points in 79 games. And you go through the rest of the seasons. I mean, he had a really good 22-23. The Sabres actually almost made the playoffs. I believe they finished with 91 points that year. So he had a really good year there. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like, I would look into this because what if you put this player on a more competitive team? And I know a lot of Rangers fans might scoff at that idea. The Rangers are not a competitive team this year, but adding a couple more, pieces and fresh players, and a player like Dylan Cozens who's coming from Buffalo to New York with a new opportunity, something could work here. So I think it's interesting, something to look at, but I don't know if Chris Drury wants to add somebody who's not necessarily proven for a cap hit of close to, $8 million at this point, that he just moved out in Jacob Trouba. So I'm not sure he wants to do that. I wonder if he wants to go after somebody more established that he knows, maybe like a JT Miller who used to play for the Rangers, or, a guy that is more established in the league at this point. You know exactly what you're going to get from him. So I am curious about that. If you look at the Buffalo Sabres lineup, like we mentioned, not sure what they could use from the New York Rangers at this point in time, because it seems like, they're going to miss the playoffs once again. If you look at the defense, like maybe you can offer them a Keandre Miller or Ryan Lindgren. I don't know if there's any incentive for them to take on those contracts or those players. So that's very interesting as well to look into. But maybe they could use, maybe it's a Capo Caco type deal. Like Capo Caco has been held in very high regard by Chris Drury. He doesn't want to let go of him because he thinks, he's a really good player, and he is. But imagine, Dylan Cozens on the wing there, or maybe a little bit higher in the lineup, what he can do for the team. Again, I would look into it. Dylan Cozens, I think there's a lot of upside, and when he's playing with a competitive team, I think he can do some damage. But it's a very interesting proposition. I think Maybe, I don't know if I would go after JT Miller or Dylan Cozens. Maybe somebody who's more established in the league that could help. Maybe some leadership qualities as well. If you're going to spend that money, like on a Dylan Cozens, let's say, or, you know, assets as well, because you got to trade for him, right? Because you just freed up $8 million, and I'm not sure you want to go after somebody who's younger and a little bit unproven. And JT Miller, to me, I mean, yes, he would help the team immediately, but if you look at your aging core, are you a Stanley Cup contender right now? I'm not sure. I think you need a little bit, a few more pieces than just JT Miller. So let me know in the comments what you think. These are very interesting ideas. I just feel like Chris Drury has other plans in mind. And I think, you know, when we look at this again, that Fowler was supposed to be in that deal for Jacob Trouba. That tells me to a degree that Chris Drury has other plans in mind, right? Like, I think he wants to go after a bigger fish, but we'll see. I think a trade could be on the horizon. He did say that he wants to make a trade, but he wanted things to settle down in the week after the Jacob Trouba trade because the team has gone through a lot of turbulence. So we'll see what his plan is. I wonder if something happens or comes down before Christmas, but let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything New York Rangers.